All right, everybody. So this is going to be a fair amount of a fair amount of stuff, content in this video. So let's go ahead and get started. So 4.9 is all about challenges to sovereignty, and so just as a reminder, sovereignty is the supreme power of a government, the authority of a government. So the ability for a government to be independent of outside influences and make its own decisions. And so this section is all about what are some things that will cause that to be diminished a little bit and take away some of that authority of a government to make decisions without considering others. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And again, I apologize. This one's not going to be short. So, whoops, go back. That's one way to make it shorter. Here's kind of what we're doing. So we've talked about devolution a lot, so I won't spend too much time on that. But the ones that we're going to hit that are kind of new is looking at advancements in communication and how they can have an impact on devolution. This term supranationalism. And then democratization. We'll define supranationalism in just a bit. We're also going to look at global efforts to address transnational and environmental challenges. And so the Kyoto Protocol, you may have heard about that. So we'll look at that. We'll also look at military alliances, economic alliances, and so at the end of this, you should have an understanding of all of these different groups. These are called supranational organizations, and well, let's just define it real quick. So supranational means agreements between countries, and when those countries enter into agreements, then they have to abide by those agreements. And so even if individually they wanted to make a decision that would go against, they wouldn't be able to make a decision that would go against the agreement that they've established with those other countries. And so that's how, when we're talking about limitations on sovereignty, that's kind of what we're talking about. All right, and we'll get into that in just a bit. So again, for about the 12th time, definition of devolution, the process by which a country's government cedes power to a subnational group or an area breaks away and forms a new state. Remember, if these areas break away, if it's complete disintegration, that's that term balkanization. But again, examples here include the United Kingdom letting Scotland and Wales have greater autonomy. So again, these aren't countries breaking away, but they're saying, hey, you can have more independence. The U.S. establishing autonomous areas with Native American reservations, breakup of Yugoslavia into 7 different states. So again, we've talked a lot about that. All right. So let me move me out of the way. Do it over here. So looking at ethnicity. So I do want to take a little bit more time and just go over this one more time. So ethnicity is one of those big things that can lead to strong devolutionary forces. And the reason is a lot of things go into ethnicity. So it could be language, it could be religion, it could be different types of culture. So when we look at ethnicity, it's a broad category. And so what are some things about ethnicity that can lead to devolution? So ethnic differences. So let's kind of start here. Ethnic differences, ethnocentrism, or ethnic separatism can be the source of conflict between culture groups. So we've kind of already established that one. One or more ethnic groups may control a government. So if you have a government that's controlled by one ethnic group and the other ethnic group doesn't have much power, that can be devolutionary. Ethnic national political parties compete for political power or attempt to gain control. And so if you have multiple parties within a country or within a state, if you have multiple parties, then they will compete a lot. And some countries have lots of parties. In the U.S., we really have two main political parties, Democrats and Republicans, but that's generally more the exception than the rule when you look around the world. A lot of countries have multiple parties. It's a multi-party system. And so a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times those are based on ethnicity. It could be based on economics and different stuff. But anyway, so there is a big competition to gain political power from those different ethnic groups. They could try to gain control through armed conflict, ethnic cleansing, or terrorism, and we talked about that in the last unit. And so if you have one ethnic group against another, it can turn violent. Again, based on this ethnicity, we also have this thing, irredentism, if you recall from the last video. That is one country trying to take back part of another country that shares a similar ethnic group. And we talked about Crimea is one of those big examples. The folks in Crimea generally consider themselves Russian, and so Russia has annexed it illegally, according to the world. But that's the idea of irredentism. And so when we talk about irredentism as a challenge to sovereignty, if we have a country here, and let's say that this part is different ethnically, but it's the same over here. This irredentism by this country would challenge the sovereignty of this country. So irredentism by group two, by country two, trying to get this little swath back, would challenge the sovereignty of country one. All right. And then finally, an ethnic group may desire to establish its own nation, okay? And that is when we get into balkanization, or could agree to autonomous region, and that's one stop short of balkanization, but you get the idea. And so again, I'm going to keep hitting this because we've done a lot of these concepts before, but this is all about challenges to the sovereignty of a country. All right. And so here's some changes. So if devolution occurs within a country, here's some of those changes that could come about. And again, we've talked about these. So the formation of new states or governments, could be balkanization. More power to the regions, that's the autonomous or semi-autonomous result. None of it was one of those examples. Quebec is another example. We haven't gone a lot into Quebec, but we will, because that's one of the ones that AP does like. Local ethno-nationalism, meaning that the ethnicity becomes more nationalistic about their own ethnic group, and that can get kind of dangerous if it goes too far. Political instability, definitely could have civil war between groups. We'll watch a video here shortly on Sudan. They had a civil war there. They're having a civil war now in South Sudan, so we'll get there. But fighting, hostility, ethnic cleansing, conflict, definitely. We can look at this, in the U.S. today, the insurrection at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, that is a sign of political instability, and it's concerning for sure. Regional separatism, so, regions start to say, break up by group. So if this is our country, you might have that region saying, hey, we're going to be like this. This region over here might be a lot different. And so that'd be regional separatism. Economic instability, if we have a lot of devolution, economic instability could occur because of the way the taxes are spent, because of the way the government responds to different groups, because of differences in income, differences in resources, lots of different things. And then we could also have mass migration. So, and we've seen this already when we talked about refugees, looking at the Syrian civil war. That was devolution in a terrible way, and it's still going on in Syria and other parts of the world. And you could also just have emigration. That's when people again are leaving a country, choosing to leave a country. We talked about some places experience a brain drain, and that could be a result of devolution because the economic opportunities maybe aren't there, and so people say, "Look, I'm going to go to another country and see if I can have a better life with more opportunity." So that's what we're talking about. So all these are changes that result from devolutionary pressures from all of these. All right, so all of these things can lead to these things. All right. So let's look at, so here's kind of a new one. And again, it's a lot of words, so I apologize, but I pulled a lot of these from previous AP questions, and these are all the potential answers to those questions. And so, you wouldn't necessarily be expected to memorize each single bullet point, but you should get kind of a totality of what these things are talking about. So, all right, so effects of communication on devolution. So how can the communication technologies impact devolution? Okay, and so we've talked about what devolution is and what it can, some of the factors that lead to it, but the changes in technology that we have in terms of communication have had a pretty big impact. So let's just tick through these real quick, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. So obviously, people have personal computers, personal communication devices, cell phones, connect people who support a common ethnic, religious, or political desire to devolve the state or reform the government. All right. And so devolve the state, meaning, hey, we want to have our own say, technically and legally, or reform the government. And so I would argue that today's movements of certain groups in the U.S., they would say we want to reform the government. All right. And whether you think that's for good or ill, that's up to you. But we're definitely seeing something. All right. And the communication technology has played a part of that. And we'll mention these over here in just a second. All right. So software applications. So obviously social networking can be used to connect people who support a common ethnic, religious. So the social networking part is a big deal. So if you look over here, and we're going to look at something called the Arab Spring in just a bit. And the Arab Spring, it was when a lot of the Middle Eastern countries rose up to fight for democracy, because a lot of autocratic regimes are over there led by one person. And so Twitter and Facebook played a big part in what we call the Arab Spring. And we'll look at that more in just a bit. But today, we can look at it in the U.S., with what's going on here. Twitter banned President Trump, former President Trump, and then people started picking up on Parler. And again, these are just, the way the technology and communication is impacting how we think about things. All right. And again, radio, television, or news, or the internet can be used to broadcast ethnic, religious, or political groups intent to dissolve. And so, this station OAN, One American News Network, it is generally considered to be more right-leaning. MSNBC would be considered more left-leaning. And so a lot of people that were watching, and we've seen they've become more popular. Trump, when he was president, he promoted them a bit. And a lot of people that were watching Fox have kind of turned to OAN. And again, and I'm not saying they're completely, they have stories that their editorial part is more conservative, right? The straight news is just straight news, but the editorial parts are definitely more conservative. And again, there's left leaning and right leaning. But so these things can be used as, the creation of these things can be used to influence people towards certain beliefs. All right. So again, radio, television, news, or the internet. Groups can develop their own apps, websites, or channels for news. Social media is used to help groups organize and protest. And we'll look at this. This was big in the Arab Spring. And then videos or pictures can be taken by protesters to show abuses of government. And so, those pictures, when they get out, if there's this abuse by government officials to other people, those videos can cause the mood of the people, the mood of the majority to change. All right. So again, lots of words here, but I do want to show you a couple of headlines here as well. So we talk about the limitations of communication technology. And so all of these are generally when the government does something to cut the communication of these types of technologies, right? But we'll see at this last point here, it doesn't just have to be the government. So some things that the government can do to limit technology is they can shut down cell towers, data networks, satellite uplinks. They can filter or block information. If you're in China, you don't have the same access to all of the Google searches that you do in the US, right? And that's because the Chinese government has blocked some of them because those stories aren't friendly to the Chinese government. They can ban media broadcasting. They can ban certain groups, certain websites, pro-government applications. And so if you're the government, you can say, look, we are going to create our own applications, our own apps, our own social media. And so that would be a response. So instead of necessarily shutting these down, they would have a competing app or platform. Governments use surveillance software. And so if you're using certain websites, you might be surveilled by the government. They may be watching what you type and all that kind of stuff. And so, or they could do counter espionage to hack or destroy the networks. And so they can put their, what's the word I'm looking for? The technology folks can break into a site, the hackers, to destroy the opposition websites. And also, as we've seen just recently, private companies have some control here too. They can ban certain users from using their apps if they think that those users are violating whatever policies they've established. And so it's been a great question now, do those social networking companies have too much power? Being able to block somebody where does the free speech argument lie? It's private company, public company, but it's not part of the government. But should they have the ability to ban people? And so here's some of the headlines from recently. All right, so these are just, again, some of the communication devices. There we go. Some of the communication devices, we talked about Parler. Chosen app of Trump fans became a test of free speech because shortly after January 6th, Parler got shut down. I think it was being hosted on Amazon Web Services, AWS. So if you wanted more information on the story, you could type in Parler, AWS, into Google, and hopefully have a free search, not limited. And so, is it okay for Amazon to say we're not going to carry Parler stuff? Or is it okay for Apple or Samsung to say, look, we're not going to allow certain apps to be part of our store, our app store? And it's a good question. After barring Trump, Facebook and Twitter face scrutiny about inaction abroad. And so one of the arguments of the Trump folks is, look, Twitter has not banned certain other people in parts of the world, certain other national leaders that have done terrible things. And so, is this a double standard? And these are all good questions. That was from January 15th. Here's one just recently. So this is January 10th. Hong Kong website gets blocked, raising censorship fears. And so remember, China and Hong Kong, definitely tensions there. And so, China could have the ability to cut off certain websites or minimize some of the communication technologies that people in Hong Kong are relying on. And then finally, this last one, and note the date here. This is 2009. This is when the Arab Spring took place, revolution Facebook style. And so this is talking about how social networking has promoted revolutions within the Arab Spring. All right. So let's take a look just at some of the impacts of social networking. This wasn't social networking, but this was media. And so take a look at the date on this one. This one's kind of fun. May 22nd, 1930. And so this was Gandhi's attempt to get the British out of India. He wanted an independent India. And so Gandhi was one of these first people to believe in nonviolent protests. And so this was a picture, and this story got printed in the New York Times. And so here's kind of the quick background. These are folks who supported independence, Gandhi's folks, and they had a march on a salt works factory in India. And there's a whole long story behind this, but the protests, they marched up to the gates of the salt works, and they got beat. And so these people just kind of went in lines, and they would get beat down, and then the other people would show up and they would get beat down. And so this showed the brutality of what these people were enduring. They didn't fight back, but when the story got out, it kind of showed, wow, here's what these people are enduring. Here's what the British government is allowing to happen. And so it starts to turn the mood of the world against England and in favor of the Indians, okay, the India folks. So, and you can read that. Here's a famous picture from the Civil Rights Movement. Again, we're talking about the impact of communication. And so when we see this picture, and these were peaceful protesters, remember, that's the key. If they're peaceful protesters and this stuff is happening to them, we have sympathy for them. Once this turns nonviolent, if this individual had decided to hit the police officer, it changes everything. So that's why nonviolence is so powerful, because when you look at this, you can see he's not resisting, and they're still sicking the dogs on him. And so the police officers here represent the government, and this individual represents somebody who's trying to stand up for their rights. And so when you see this picture, this helps turn the tide of the mood of the country against the authority. All right. And that's why communication is so important. And we talked about the video. If you can show a video of something happening, it can cause the opinions of people to change. All right. So let's watch this real quick one on Arab Spring. This isn't a long video.
On the December day in 2010, a produce vendor in Tunisia stood in front of a government office and set himself on fire, killing himself. His desperate actions helped spark a revolutionary uprising that has come to be known as the Arab Spring. While the uprising across the Middle East and North Africa did not take place during a specific calendar season, they were commonly referred to as the Arab Spring. an allusion to the so-called Prague Spring, a 1968 democratic revolution in Czechoslovakia. The Arab Spring timeline began in Tunisia, a country that had been under the allegedly corrupt and authoritarian rule of President Zayn al-Abidine Ben Ali for more than 2 decades. On December 17, 2010, a working-class vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi was approached by Tunisian authorities about his unlicensed cart. He offered to pay a fine, but instead his vegetables were confiscated, and he was publicly humiliated by the police. Afterwards, to add insult to injury, local officials refused to hear his complaints of harassment. In a show of protest, Bouazizi stood in front of the local governor's office and set himself on fire. He died from his injuries on January 4th. Bouazizi became a martyr who inspired others who were suffering from unemployment at the hands of a corrupt government. His death sparked a Tunisian revolution in which protesters armed themselves not only with signs, but with cell phones, allowing the protest to spread at social media speed. On January 11th, a week after Bouazizi's death, Tunisia's government fell apart, and the disgraced president Ben Ali fled the country. The videos of the successful uprising shared via social media raised global awareness of the protests themselves. State-run news organizations were barely able to keep up. The speed and success of the protest inspired others across the region. Throughout January, protests erupted in Algeria, Jordan, and Oman. By January 25th, the movement reached Egypt, followed by Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Libya, and several other countries. On February 11th, the Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak stepped down, and by the end of the year, Yemen's government was overthrown, as was Libya's, ending the dictatorship and the life of their leader, Muammar Gaddafi, who was captured and killed by Libyan rebel militia. While some of the Arab Spring protests did result in regime changes, not all of them brought about positive change for the working class people like Mohamed Bouazizi. In some cases, the uprisings were co-opted by religious extremists like ISIS, who embraced the revolt against secular Arab regimes for their own agenda. As a result, when governments toppled in places like Syria and Iraq, rebel groups stepped in to fill the void, using strong-arm tactics and even terrorism. In Syria, civil war has resulted in the deaths of some 500,000 people, stoking the fires of unrest. Along with political instability and economic stagnation in neighboring countries, the Syrian civil war has also led to a massive refugee crisis in the region. While the Arab Spring revealed how fast a revolution fueled by technology could unfold, it also once again proved how complicated and unpredictable revolutions can be.
All right, so that's a pretty good summary of you know the impact of technology. Let me see if we can get past this. Oh, come on. What am I doing? Sorry. Next, there we go. And so this is one real quick one on what happened in Egypt, because Egypt was a big deal as well. They all are. But I do want you to take note, you know, that one individual who set himself on fire, think about the impact of that one person on the world. Because if that individual hadn't done that, that spark may have not been lit in Tunisia, and the spark in Tunisia lit the spark across the Middle East like that. And so, you know, and this is the power of communication, the power of social media, and it can be used for positive and negative things, like most things. But this is a real quick one, I think, a couple minutes on Egypt and their social networking revolution.
The peaceful Egyptian revolution had a distinct goal, but no clear leader. Yet from the masses, a handful emerged, including Wael Ghonim. His tweets offered both a narrative and a nudge to protesters.
He's been sort of tweeting every day, almost every hour, and he's developed quite a mass of followers. He's become a figurehead of this revolt. I guess we can now call it a revolution.
It's generally acknowledged that Ghonim's Facebook page first sparked the protests. Titled "We're All Khalid Said," it memorialized an Egyptian businessman who'd been beaten to death by police after threatening to expose corruption. The page called for protests on January 25th. That became known as the Day of Wrath, as thousands poured onto the streets. Ghoneim's arrest by Egyptian authorities on January 28th and release 12 days later only added to his legend. When Ghoneim is mentioned, usually his company is too.
Google executive Wael Ghoneim created a Facebook page that
He's the Middle East and North Africa marketing manager at Google. So far, Google has commented only briefly. We can't comment on his personal beliefs. He's on leave at the moment, and we look forward to having him back at Google.
It's a little bit tricky here, this relationship here, because this is an employee of Google, yes, but he's acting on his own time.
Robert Solomon says companies in emerging markets like Egypt, where governments are big customers, need to be careful not to bite the hand that feeds them.
Is this connection likely a good thing or a bad thing for Google?
Well, on the one hand, it could be a bad thing to the extent that Ghoneim's activities raise some questions or jeopardize some relationships that Google has in Egypt. However, it might be a good thing if people now view Google as a good place to work and a place that allows young people to have a voice.
A voice which ushered in a social revolution in Egypt, where the most powerful weapon was social networking. Seth Doane, CBS News, New York.
All right. So this does bring up another question, and that is, if you're a company like Google or all these tech companies, if should you go into a country if they say, look, you can come in here and you can make a lot of money, but you can't show certain content? Should Google say, we're either all in, it's either all or nothing, or should they go in and say, okay, we agree to the terms and we will block certain things? And so, as a company who wants to make money, that question's pretty easy. But as a company that wants to be conscientious about, political rights and things like that, it gets a little more complicated. So anyway, just want to go over that. Communication's a huge thing, obviously. All right, so let's go into supranationalism. And again, we're talking about challenges to sovereignty. And so devolution obviously is a big one. Communication can be a big one. And now we're talking about supranationalism. And again, well, here's our definition up here. When several countries form an organization to achieve common goals and benefits for all the countries. These organizations are often political, military, economic, or environmental. And we'll hit examples of all these. So some of the ones you need to know, and there's going to be a few more. The United Nations, you've heard of them. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, this is NATO, if you've heard of them. The European Union, typically known as the EU, and the Paris Climate Accord. All right, and so we'll talk all about these. So let's get into the UN. So just, the UN's really the biggest supranational organization out there. Pretty much every country in the world is a member of the UN. They do a lot of different stuff from famine relief to trying to keep the peace to, you name it, health stuff. They're involved in the world, okay? And so we will show a video on this one. I won't on the others, but I do want you to see, just the structure of the UN. 3.5 minutes.
In 2015, the United Nations turned 70. Since World War II, the UN has existed to foster communication between its member states to achieve global goals, which would be impossible individually. So how do they do this? How exactly does the UN work? Well, the UN is divided into 6 main parts. The first is the General Assembly, which includes nearly all internationally recognized countries, making up 193 member states. The Assembly meets annually in September and debates issues on security and diplomacy. In 2015, the major topic is climate change and helping developing countries face the threat of global warming. Within the General Assembly, resolutions relating to defense, as well as administrative issues like new membership and budget, require a 2/3 vote. Most other issues only need a majority. Every country, regardless of size, gets a single vote. However, there are 2 states in the UN which are not actual members: the Vatican, whose government is called the Holy See, and Palestine. These are called permanent non-member observer states, and while they can't vote, they are allowed to take part in debates. The second arm of the UN is the Security Council. It exists to prevent conflict on a large scale, promoting peace through diplomacy or sanctions. It only has 5 permanent members: Russia, France, China, the UK, and the US, which were all winning powers in World War II. The permanent members have veto power, and their use has been incredibly controversial. The US, for example, has vetoed dozens of resolutions against Israel for their actions in the Middle East. There are 10 more members representing Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and Western Europe. Those 10 are elected on a rolling basis every 2 years to make sure that major world regions have representation. The Security Council's resolutions are carried out by the UN's peacekeeping force, which boasts about 100,000 soldiers. One of the most important parts of the UN is the Economic and Social Council, which works to improve standards of living and promote human rights. Most of what the UN actually does is centered around helping developing countries. The Council works with specialized agencies like the World Health Organization and High Commission for Refugees to make that happen. The judicial arm of the UN is the International Court of Justice. This is where international law violations are debated and prosecuted, although countries with significant power can often refuse to comply with their decisions. The fifth arm of the UN is actually not operational. The Trusteeship Council was created in the 1940s to help developing territories and dependencies become independent countries. The Council was suspended in 1994 after helping more than 70 countries gain independence. And finally, the Secretariat is essentially the internal administrative workings of the UN. They're the ones who compile reports, communicate between the different councils, and are headed by the UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon. Although the UN exists to promote global cooperation, many have criticized the greater influence of the 5 permanent Security Council members. Still, the UN has seen incredible advancement in fighting hunger, poverty, and child mortality. Without communication and cooperation, the world would be considerably worse. Want to get a deep dive into why the UN Security Council has 5 permanent members? Check out Secret Daily's video to find out more.
So if the 15-member council passes a substantive resolution, all 193 members are obliged to follow through. As you can imagine, member states at large do not always agree with the council, which has led to some instances of dissent.
Thanks for watching TestTube News. Make sure to like and subscribe for new videos every day.
Alrighty, so that's just an example of what the UN is and some of their goals. And again, this is a supranational organization, and so we're a big member of it. The headquarters for the UN is in New York. We're the biggest financial contributor to the United Nations. And so, you know, as much as when we enter into these agreements with the UN, generally we are obliged to follow them. Now, remember, one thing is that there is no police force for the United Nations. And so, you know, if countries say, hey, we're not going to do what we said we were going to do or what the UN wants to do, there's really not great challenges to them. You know, the US could say, yeah, we know what the UN is saying, but we're going to go somewhere else. So that kind of thing. But anyway, in general, this is, you know, the biggest supranational organization. All right. And so some of the advances in communication that have helped with supranationalism, again, is, and you saw this just a bit, but this is with supranational organizations. So it does allow people to connect, people in countries to connect faster across time and space. Military alliances are benefited from the communication technology. Economics are greatly benefited with these supranational organizations. You can link different markets and banks across economic alliances. And so, again, just that communication flow between countries has strengthened those supranational ties. All right. So let's look at effects of communication on democratization. And this actually probably should have come, this slide should have been one above. But anyway, so this is the Arab Spring kind of thing. So communications technologies bring outside information to people who live in autocratic countries. And this, again, this slide should have been one up. And it also makes it easier for groups, so information can come in, and it allows also information to go out. All right. And so I did want to take a look at this. I apologize again for the placement of this slide, but if you look at the Arab Spring, so these are country status of selected Arab countries. So we know Libya was here's Tunisia. They were part of the Arab Spring, and they are full-on democracy now. All right. And so that's the blue. And so if we look around, you know, the success of the Arab Spring, it's a little bit depressing because Libya is a failed state. They're in civil war right now. Yemen, failed state, civil war, Syria, civil war. You can see the full autocracy. Saudi Arabia never really had much of an Arab Spring. Oman is an autocracy. UAE is an autocracy. And then we get to the green part, autocracy or restricted democracy, and so these countries, it's very limited democracy here. And so when we look at the Arab Spring, it is this big uprising, but it hasn't had the intended effect. If all of these countries over here were blue, then that would have been an incredible thing. But some of these countries are still fighting. Some of the fighting is over, and autocrats have taken over again. But again, that's the effect of communication. All right, so let's get back into the supranational stuff. So let's look at the economic supranationalism. We have three things: economic, political. So economic and political are kind of going to go in the same thing. Military, supranationalism, and environmental. So this is probably the most important slide for economics. We'll look at some of the organizations, but you definitely need to know a decent number of these. And so why would countries get together and form an alliance together for economics? Actually, let's do this one first. Think about the U.S. So we've got 50 individual states in our nation. So would we be better off economically if we broke up into 50 nations, or are we better as one nation economically? And so that answer is a pretty strong one nation. All right, and there's a lot of different reasons. All right, and so those reasons that might just intuitively pop up into your head are those reasons that other countries enter into supranational agreements. So when we look at the European Union, it's a lot of those countries that have gotten together and they act like the U.S. as a whole. Those individual nations have gotten together economically and said, look, let's work together here. We're going to have a single currency. We're going to lower our borders. So if you look at the U.S., we have one currency in the U.S. Trade can happen across state lines without any problems, so it's free trade. Labor can flow. So if I lived in South Carolina, then I moved to Arizona, and there wasn't any issues with me finding a job, and so it's this free flow of everything that has allowed our country to become so wealthy. And so when you think about the 50 states versus one country, that one country has a huge economic benefit. The U.S. as a nation, as this big nation, economic power, has a lot of influence across the world. The EU, now that those countries are joined together, they have a whole lot more influence as the EU than they do as individual countries. And so, you have a country like Italy, who's part of the EU, they wouldn't have a whole lot of power globally, just as an individual nation, but as part of the EU, they have a lot more influence. And so the ASEAN nations, we'll look at them in just a bit, same kind of thing. The African Union, same kind of thing. So you'll get the idea here. And so again, this, the overall sense of why supranational agencies exist in part is because of this: power and safety in numbers. You can have collective action towards a common goal. And that goal needs to be something that all members agree on. All right, so let's go back to this. So here's the idea of economic supranationalism. So why do these countries get together, and how exactly does that work? Okay, so they get together because they want to have better lives, better economic lives, better economic opportunity. And so here's the things that can make that happen. So when those countries get together, here's the things that will make their economic lives better. And this is why countries do it. All right. So we're not going to worry as much about this first one, economies of scale. We may go over it in class, but and so here's some of the other things. They can have a common set of regulations and laws and lower tariffs. So tariffs are when you tax imports. And so when you tax an import, let's say we have a car coming into the US, let's say it's a Toyota that's coming into the US, that costs 20 grand. If we put a tariff on it, like a 10% tariff, then that car in the US would cost $22,000. And so Toyota's sad because they don't get the sale, as many sales, and we're sad because if we want a Toyota, it costs a lot more. And so the idea of supranational organizations economically, if you can lower those tariffs, that's good for most people. Trade moves more freely because you start to drop certain restrictions. Countries are allowed to specialize. And so if you're good at one thing in your country, you can do that. Another country can do something else, and then you can trade. And when you do economics, take economics, you'll see how that works. Specialization is an incredibly good thing. All right, access to larger markets. And so if you think about the US, one of the reasons we are such power is we're a huge market, 330 million people who have money for the most part. And so if you are the EU and if you're a member of the EU, say Italy, and you're producing something, and now you can open up your market to all of the European Union without tariffs being imposed on your products, you're going to be better off. All right. Open borders eases the movement of labor, tourists, and goods. And again, these are all good things here. Greater international influence, talked about that already. Common currency, this makes trade a lot easier. Remember, in the US, if we had 50 different currencies, it would be much tougher to trade. We could still do it, but it wouldn't flow nearly as much as it does now. And there is also a common policy. And so this is where the downside could come in, okay? And so you could have common policy for resources, agriculture, economic policies, environment, trade, military. And so these can be good, but it could also be bad because this is the big kicker, all right? And so when you are a country and you enter into these agreements, you lose control over your individual policy, right? And so if there's something that you want to do that the rest of the people don't, if you're in this agreement, you can't do what you want to do. And so you are giving up, and again, remember, this is all about sovereignty. You're giving up part of your ability to make decisions on your own. Now, in the case of economic supranationalism, these agreements between countries do it for a reason, and that's because they benefit. But there is this downside. So, economic policy would be one. A country might want to do one thing with their currency, but if they've given up their currency for one currency, then, and you'll get more into that in econ. So, but anyway, and the other big thing, and this is not to be overlooked, probably shouldn't have been last, but when you integrate countries economically, the chances of war happening are much, much lower. Our big adversary today would be China would probably be considered the biggest one. Russia would be up there as well. But, we are pretty economically integrated with China. And so even if tensions rise, the likelihood of going to war with China is much, much, much lower since we are economically integrated with them. They're our biggest trading partner. We give them a lot of money, and so they've got an interest to keep this relationship good. We give them a lot of money, they give us a lot of stuff, and so, yeah, so this idea down here is one of, the better impacts of economic supranationalism, all right? Make sure you write that one down as one of the examples. All right, we did that one. So let's look at a couple of these supranational groups. I just pulled from their pages, their goals. So we can take a look. I won't spend a lot of time on this. So the EU, the European Union, you can see the countries here that are part of the EU. And so look at Bosnia here. They are recognized as a potential candidate. And so if you're Bosnia or Kosovo, if you're Bosnia and Kosovo, what's the benefit of joining the EU? And so let's say that you were a manufacturer, let's say that you were a manufacturer here in Bosnia. If you want to sell your stuff to Croatia or to Hungary or to Italy or to Germany, they might put tariffs on it, okay, because you're not part of it. But the benefit of joining the EU is all those tariffs get dropped, and now you can sell your stuff everywhere. And so you become better off, all right? And so these are pretty strong incentives to join. And you can see official candidates. So Turkey's a candidate, Serbia. So here's the former Yugoslavia for the most part. And so take note, the United Kingdom, they just dropped out. If you've heard the term Brexit, right? Brexit was the United Kingdom dropping out of the EU. They wanted to do their own thing. And remember, the euro is the official currency, is the currency for all these countries now. That was part of the European Union. And so again, the single currency is a big deal. Again, it makes the flow of trade a lot easier. So, and so when, England's left, now they have to negotiate deals with each country if they want to establish better trade deals with them. And so, they did it. So they'll kind of figure out the consequences from there. I will say that Scotland, one of the things Scotland has said is that they want to remain part of the EU. They still want to be part of this because they see this huge economic benefit. And so Scotland's talking about, hey, maybe we should try and become our own country. That's the devolution stuff, and it's for an economic reason. All right, so here's the goals of the European Union. I'll just hit these highlights real quick, and you'll get the sense: promote peace and the well-being, freedom, security, and justice without internal borders, sustainable development, competitive markets, full employment, social progress, environmental protection, combat social exclusion, discrimination, scientific progress, cohesion, solidarity, respect, economic and monetary union. And so you get the idea. They want to, if you look at these goals, it's very similar to a country, a single country like the U.S. These are all things that we enjoy in the U.S., and so that's kind of what they're going for. ASEAN, ASEAN, let me move that again, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, whoops, forgot the nations part. How about that? Sorry about that. And so, hang on. And so you can see again, here's the countries that are part of it. So Myanmar, or Myanmar, whichever you prefer, Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, Philippines. And so these groups, these countries have gotten together, and they're called ASEAN. And so you can see, again, here's their goals. And you'll see some similarities. So economic growth, social progress, cultural development, peace and stability, collaboration, mutual assistance, provide assistance to each other in the form of training and research, collaborate more effectively, promote Southeast Asian studies, maintain close and beneficial cooperation. So again, this is trying to get countries to work more together for the overall good of everybody. And then finally, we have the African Union. This is also one. And you can see pretty much every country is part of it. These are suspended members. So Mali and South Sudan have been suspended right now. But here's their goals: promote the unity and solidarity of African states, intensify cooperation for a better life, defend their sovereignty, their territorial integrity and independence. Think about, why is independence here such a big deal? Go back to colonization. And again, eradicate all forms of colonialism from Africa. We know we've started to look at some of the problems that colonialism has caused in Africa. And so this is a group that's trying to overcome that. And then internal cooperation. So you hopefully you've picked up a pattern here of these three agencies, these three organizations. So that's the economic stuff. And then the last one, this is one not based necessarily on region, but OPEC is one you should know. It wasn't an AP thing, but you should just know this. OPEC stands for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. All right, and so if you look at the map here, we've got Venezuela, Ecuador, and then most of the countries in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia is kind of the big one here. They produce the most, but we've also got Nigeria, Angola, and a few of these here. So the idea of OPEC, so they've gotten together, and so take a look. I just pulled this from the website: coordinate and unify petroleum policies of its member countries and ensure the stabilization of oil markets. And so here's the idea, and I forget the number off the top of my head. I'm just going to kind of make it up, but it'll be close. So the OPEC accounts for something like 70% of the world's oil. That's off. Google it, and it might be a little bit lower, but they control a fair amount of the oil market. And so here's the idea: if they wanted the prices to go up for oil, you econ students, they would want to decrease the supply. And so if you get all of these countries together to agree to cut back their supply of oil, then that's going to drive the price up, which makes them better off. Now, they do have competition. The US produces a lot of oil, and Russia produces a lot of oil. And so there are other countries, Canada as well. There's other countries that are in competition, but if you control a large part of the market, then that's an impact. And so they can help greatly influence the supply of oil in the market, and by doing that, they can greatly influence the price. All right, as long as they work together, and that's more of an econ topic. So, anyways, those are economic ones. Let's look at the military supranationalism real quick. So, military organizations, countries join together to cooperate militarily. Strong alliances make it less likely to be attacked by other countries and more likely to receive help in a war. And so why do countries form alliances? For that reason. All right, military alliances share training, technology, military bases, all that kind of stuff. And we've looked at, like where the U.S. military bases are throughout the world. It's a lot of different places. Two that I want you to make sure you know, this one definitely, this one's in the AP guide, but and this one, so these guys are still around. NATO, Warsaw Pact, I've mentioned them before. Let's take a look real quick. So NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, again, just pulled this from their website. These are all the countries that are part of NATO. And if you remember, when this was the Soviet Union, these NATO countries were formed together to block the Soviet Union from coming into Western Europe. And so as part of NATO, and this is one of the key things, and you can see the political and military stuff over here, it is designed to keep the peace, all right? And again, they are still an active organization. And so here's the benefit of being part of NATO. Let's say that you are Turkey down here, and Russia decides to attack. As a member country of NATO, it's kind of like if you're a member of NATO, if one country gets attacked, everybody gets attacked. And so Turkey could request the assistance of all of these other countries in fighting what would now be Russia, right? And so there's a definite benefit. And so if you're Estonia or Latvia, these countries up here, Lithuania, Russia would have to think twice before attacking one of these countries. Now, well, no, bad thought. And so, that's the big reason to be part of NATO. And so these countries aren't right now. They may try and gain acceptance into NATO, but again, this is the big thing. This acts as a big deterrence on other countries. This is a protective device. If you're Poland, you are part of NATO, and so if Poland gets attacked, it is like attacking everybody, all right? And everybody could come to their defense, all righty? And so I think, what is Article 5? No, we'll leave it at that. So here's Warsaw Pact. So Warsaw Pact was the Soviet Union. This was, again, other groups that were part of the Warsaw Pact. And so here's NATO over here, the green, here's Warsaw Pact. And so very similar things to NATO, but just for the Soviet Union. This, make sure, get my face out of the way, is not in existence today. Okay, when the Soviet Union ended, so did the Warsaw Pact. All right. And now the last one, environmental supranationalism. So we know global warming's happening. The vast majority of scientists agree that part of that warming is human caused. And so, how the world addresses it is going to be important. And so, if one country says, hey, we're going to do something, that's good, but you need cooperation among many countries. And so those are supranational organizations. So countries work together to cooperate on environmental issues. They work together because environmental issues transcend political borders. It's not just hot in one country, it's hot in a lot of different countries. It's warming up, I'm sorry, to be more correct. So countries might work to, so here's some of the different things: set limits for air and water pollution, protect animal species from being over-harvested and endangered. So limits on fishing, things like that. Countries work together to manage local environmental issues complicated by political borders. And so if there's an environmental issue, I'll give you an example. In the U.S., so draw a quick U.S., that's terrible. And then we've got Canada up here. In the U.S., we had a lot of factories here, and they would dump a lot of pollution into the air. And when that pollution got up into the atmosphere, and then it rained back down up here, this is called acid rain. And so you had people in Canada who were getting rained on by rain that was basically acidified and starting to kill crops that came from pollution here. And so, there's got to be some kind of cooperation between the U.S. and Canada to figure this out, because this is what we would call in economics an externality. And so there has to be cooperation between governments, because individuals won't be able to fix this. So cooperation between governments. All right. The two that you need to know for this: Paris Climate Accord and the Arctic Council. Again, pulled this from their website. So you can see this is the Paris Climate Accord, and the red significantly stands out. And so this map is dated. Okay, this is November 2019. As of January, I think it was the 20th or 21st of 2021, we are back in. All right, we have, if we're not in officially, I think there's like a month leeway, but we are rejoining. So when Biden became president, he said we're going to rejoin this. So you can see most of the countries of the world have joined. And so what does it mean? Okay, so take a look over here. The agreement includes commitments from all major emitting countries to cut their climate pollution and to strengthen those commitments over time. So we are committing to cutting pollution, all right? And so when we do that, we have to start to say, okay, how can the U.S. do it? And again, is this global effort needed on climate? You know, this is the world climate, and so you will need, you know, if the U.S. just tries to do it alone, it's not going to work. There's a lot of other polluting countries out there. I think China's the biggest polluter right now, but that could change. And so we need China to be involved. We need the U.S. to be involved, and Canada and Russia and, you know, all these countries. We need it. This is a global effort, and so, but by joining this agency, this agreement, you know, we are saying, look, we're going to write laws that limits our pollution, and that might cost us more. You know, we might say, look, the minimum miles per gallon for a car, we're going to jack that from 24 up to 30. So any cars that are being sold have to have a minimum of 30 miles per gallon. And so the way car companies would do that, it would be more expensive. You know, we might have to raise the price of gas. Instead of $2.50, maybe it's $4.50. You know, and so this agreement, you know, just standing back and saying, yeah, of course we need to do this. The reality of it is, you know, we're agreeing to cut certain things and to spend more money. Now, it could lead to job creation as we move towards new technologies, and so there's a lot to it there. But this is, again, we're trying to figure out, you know, we are giving up some of our sovereignty. And so countries that have joined this agreement, which is almost all of them, are agreeing to give up part of their sovereignty, right? All right, last one, Arctic Council. This is, leading intergovernment forum promoting cooperation, coordination, and interaction among the Arctic states. And so this isn't an economic thing. They are looking at issues of sustainable development and environmental protection. So they're worried about the Arctic up here. And so this group is formed to try to work together to protect this environment. And they're also trying to figure out who owns what. And we'll watch a video at some point on that, you know, like where these lines should be drawn. And global warming is going to have a big part of what happens up in this area in terms of resource availability and things like that. So, all right. So some of the overall effects of supranationalism, countries that join a supranational organization may have to cede, meaning give away, some of their sovereignty to the organization. All right. European countries have given up control of their currency. NATO, Charter says an attack on one is attacked by all. Again, this is us giving up part of our sovereignty. As a member of NATO, one country gets attacked, we have to get involved. That's part of our agreement. Even if we don't want to, that's what we've agreed to. The Kyoto Protocol, now that we're back in it, you know, if we need to write laws that hold to this agreement, all right? And other countries do as well. So you are giving up for a greater good. That's kind of the idea behind it. And again, similar kind of stuff. Countries cooperate with one another politically, economically, socially, militarily, and environmentally through a variety of supranationalist organizations. In order to meet the goals, countries must give up some of their sovereignty to that greater organization. All right, so we will leave it at that. This one has been long enough. So the collapse of the Soviet Union, this is a video. Well, let's do this. You want to, well, nope, I'll wait on this one. So this is, you know, when we look at devolution, you know what, I'm going to play it. And so just hit it on, make sure on 1.5 speed, and then we'll be done. Alrighty, I think it's 10 minutes or so. And again, this is devolutionary processes in the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1991, I think is when it fell.
December 25th, 2016 marks 25 years since the president of the Soviet Union resigned, leading to the end of the most powerful communist-leaning country in history. Although it stood as a major opposing force to the United States throughout the second half of the 20th century, the country's domestic struggles ultimately led to its downfall. So why exactly did the Soviet Union collapse? Well, the fall of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, can be said to begin with its last leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. He was in power from 1985 to 1991 and implemented a large number of reforms to try and deal with the growing unrest countrywide. Gorbachev entered office following what was called the era of stagnation, generally considered to cover the mid-1960s to the mid-1980s. Although the causes of this stagnation varied, they were largely based on economic, social, and military issues instituted during the reign of Leonid Brezhnev and several subsequent leaders. Although different theories have been proposed, one suggests that the Soviet Union was desperate to outperform the United States in two major regions, military and spaceflight. This led to excessive spending, with the Soviet Union establishing a self-contained military-industrial complex at the expense of the economy, leading to underproduction and stagnation. Moreover, after decades of repressive communist rule, domestic attitudes towards the government were at an all-time low, leading to greater dissent and unrest. As the new leader, Gorbachev quickly set out to reverse this stagnation through two massive programs unlike Russia had ever seen before. The first was called Glasnost, effectively meaning transparency. The Communist Party had long banned books, operated a secret police force against dissent, and arrested citizens for political disagreements. But Glasnost ended all of these practices and even tacitly encouraged new freedoms. The policy also made an effort to reduce the Communist Party's hold on the entire government, allowing competitive multi-candidate elections to occur. The next stage was called perestroika, or restructuring. This was an effort to move away from the structured economy run entirely by the state, allowing for more private ownership of businesses and semi-free market access. These two new efforts completely shifted the focus of Soviet politics and economy and closely mirrored the Western ideals that had made other countries successful. Unfortunately, the major shift was unable to undo decades of state rule, and in the words of Gorbachev, the old system collapsed before the new one had time to begin working, and the crisis in the society became even more acute. In this interim period, the economy got considerably worse, as did standards of living for nearly all members of the Soviet Union and its satellite states. Slowly, these Eastern European satellite states began to hold free elections, mostly as a result of the Glasnost reform. The first to shift away was Poland, whose newly free elections instituted a non-communist party and ultimately independence. Soon, other satellite states saw their own peaceful transitions of power. Eventually, these efforts led to widespread unrest throughout the government, and in August of 1991, a group of hardline Communist Party members attempted a coup d'etat against Gorbachev, who they believed was steering the country into failure. The coup did not work, and Gorbachev resigned as head of the Communist Party, which had tried to overthrow him. It was ultimately dissolved entirely. In the midst of the coup, several Baltic states announced their independence, which triggered a domino effect over the next few months. By December of 1991, Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan left the Soviet Union. They formed amongst themselves a new international commonwealth of independent states removed from the USSR. Within a few days, the now powerless USSR government, which technically only had power over Georgia, was dissolved by Gorbachev, ending 69 years of a world power. In the past 25 years, Russia has managed to somewhat recover its former glory, as the Russian Federation is the 13th largest economy in the world, boasting the second most powerful military. Although it is still lagging behind, Russia's resurgence as a global power is a testament to its influence before the fall of the Soviet Union. Russia has played a big role in many world conflicts, most recently the Syrian civil war. Its involvement marks the first time since the end of the Cold War that Russia has stepped outside of the former borders of the USSR militarily. Find out more about Russia's role in Syria in this video here. Since the start of the conflict, the government of Russia has openly supported Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, originally in the form of political backing in the UN. Thanks for watching Seeker Daily. Please make sure to like and subscribe for...
Okay, so I did want to show that one. That wasn't very long. Whoops. And so the idea is that the Soviet Union balkanized and they created independent countries. And so, again, that is devolution going into balkanization. And a lot of that was for economic reasons in large part. So, and they couldn't keep the economics, led to social problems and all that stuff that we'll get into later. So anyway, that's it for this one. Take care.